Good. All right, so you're here today for our Navigator training focus series, Trauma Informed Care. And this is always such a relevant topic because as a navigator working in the emergency room, you are around a lot of chaos. Some people call it organized chaos, right? So that's what we learn to live with. So not only is this information going to help you and be helpful for yourself, but this is really geared towards patients and how to make a safe environment. So we're ready to get started. We have our California Bridge is a partner with Public Health Institute. We are a program of Public Health Institute, and we will share all of our materials and the slide deck after this presentation. For the best experience, just really want to quickly highlight, please put in the chat box if you have a question. Make sure the blue highlight is to everyone and not to host and panelists. Everybody wants to see the questions you guys are asking or what's being, how people are engaging. So please make sure it's addressed to everyone. Our goal here for California Bridge is to have 24/7 access to high quality treatment of substance use disorders in all California hospitals by 2025. We're up to 80%, and we're not bad. We're taking a B, okay? We would love an A, but you know what? You're the ones that made this happen. So we are so appreciative, and there's always room to grow. We have one more year left to reach our goal. So we're well on our way. I always like to start with what our CA Bridge model is. And it is exceptional because we're revolutionizing the system of care. You guys have been phenomenal to help us reach the goal with our 3-model process. First is low barrier treatment. Our doctors giving buprenorphine for opioid use disorder in the emergency room. Patient just comes in and says, I'm in withdrawal. And if they qualify for buprenorphine, we give it to them, plain and simple. Or we can prescribe them an at-home self-start. So those are our physicians. But the last 2 focuses and topics are connection to care and community. That's our navigators bridging our patients to resources, and these are vetted resources to the community for treatment, for recovery, and for whatever they're ready and available for, that you are connecting them to care. And then the last pillar is culture of harm reduction, and that's changing kind of the culture in your own hospital, reducing stigma, bringing out awareness and prevention. So we know you are hard at work at this. Please enjoy our training today because, again, it's something to offer your patients and for you personally. All righty. We have a few announcements. Of course, I'm plugging my community health worker certification program for Medi-Cal billing. I just want to make sure that you guys are aware you do qualify for getting certified through CA Bridge for substance use and substance use navigation. So if you have any questions, please let us know. mentors@cabridge.org. Just as everybody has goals for their work, we have our own work goals here at CA Bridge. So we want to get the most navigators certified through us. We have our navigator update coming in August, and what's happening next month. Opioid awareness, right? It's International Overdose Awareness Day is August 31st. So we want to promote you guys and kind of challenge you, and look on our post-event email. We will be having a Navigator naloxone challenge in August. So more information to come. We're really excited about this. So that's just a teaser. We have Navigator Focus Series. Next month will be about overdose confidentiality and ethics. So we really hope to see you next month. And then for July, we want to acknowledge our wonderful navigators for July, Jeffrey Cooper, Stephanie Garcia, and Nazareth. We are so excited that we have this opportunity to acknowledge you guys. We know the hard work, and if you haven't been spotlighted, don't worry. We are definitely working our way. We will find you. So definitely look for that in our newsletter. I want to take a moment to present our speaker now, Jasmine Nakagawa. She is one of our favorites here. If you missed her last year, then you're in for a treat because she is wonderful. I think it's like a counseling session, Jasmine. That's how I felt after you talking to me. It was like, oh, that release, after yoga, that just like, wow, I'm in a really calm, steady place, very stable. So if you haven't had that experience, you are in for a treat because it will make you feel better about, so your practice, your confidence, and just your self-worth, right? So I'm really excited about that. But I do, before I hand it off to Jasmine, is let you know that her organization she comes from is Cypress Resilience Project. They are one of our partners, and we teamed up last year for mental health first aid certification, and she's opening up that certification again this year for our navigators. So we will have more information to share, but that is a course that you can take and be certified, and it's great for professional development. If you don't have it, I highly recommend it. And we will be getting together and more information to come on that. Next, I am going to hand it over to Jasmine.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Sherry. Now I feel a lot of pressure because you're like, it's going to be so great. So I have a high standard to meet, I guess. And I just want to say thank you so much, everyone, for having me today. It's really a pleasure to be a part of this space with y'all. So my name is Jasmine Nakagawa. My pronouns are she, her, and I work for an organization that is also a program of Public Health Institute called Cypress Resilience Project. And at Cypress, we do community-based trainings in mental health first aid, trauma-informed practice, and grief recovery. So we work with a lot of different communities, and I've had the privilege and pleasure of meeting a lot of people who work in helping professions over the years, right? And one of the things that I love about being able to work with you all is that I know how important the work is that you are doing in your communities. And I am humbled to be a part of it with you because I know that it's not easy. And I know that many of us, when we come to this work, it's because we have our own lived experiences, because we want to make change for the better, because we have personal connection to the work, right? And that, that has weight to it. And so I just wanted to start by saying thank you so much for having me. And thank you for the work that y'all are doing, because I know how important it is and how hard it is. A little bit more about me. So I started out my career in education and was a middle school special education teacher for some time, and then have been working with teenagers who are interested in the health professions for the past 12 years, and grew the Cypress Resilience Project out of that work. And so my colleagues and I at Cypress, we have been building these community-based trainings that we're offering to all different kinds of professionals and organizations across the nation. And so it's really exciting. And we've had the privilege of working with a lot of wonderful people. I am originally from Hawaii, so grew up in Hawaii, moved to California, have lived in the Northern California Bay Area for some time now. And I'm a single mom of 3 kids, so I got a lot going on in my personal life as well. I have a 12-year-old, an 8-year-old, and a 5-year-old. Two of my children have high support needs, so autism and epilepsy, and so we have a lot going on. And the reason I say that is because I want to acknowledge that everybody in this space, I know that you have a lot going on too, right? Y'all are navigating the personal relationships in your lives and your own lived experiences, and the like everybody here is somebody, right? And so not only are you doing this work at work with your patients, but also you're doing it as a human being in the world. And I want to acknowledge that that's not always easy. And so we're going to talk a little bit at the end of the presentation about maybe how to build in some space to allow yourself to process some of the hard things that are going on at work, so it's not impacting your ability to stay in the work. So I don't know if anybody has questions about that before we get started. I just wanted to start with that introduction and say hi. Good. Okay, a couple of housekeeping things. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my slides, but So while I'm doing this presentation, can everybody see this? I just want to make sure. Yes, we good? Yes. Okay. I see Chaya nodding. Okay, I'm getting a bunch of yeses in the chat. Great. So, as we're going through our presentation today, I just want to let you know that I may ask for you to participate in discussion or jump in and make a comment. I don't want it to be super formal. So if you have thoughts, please feel free to pop them into the chat. I'm going to be watching the chat as best as I possibly can, to make sure that I'm addressing the comments that come through. Whatever feels safe and comfortable for you. But I also want to say, like, I like to start out my presentations with this quote. And so it says, the expectation that we can be immersed in suffering and loss daily and not be touched by it is as unrealistic as expecting to be able to walk through water without getting wet. So that's just to say, like, I know that the work that you're doing with your patients in your communities is difficult, right? And so, um, we are human beings and we take a lot of that on, and we are holding that when we go home to our families and living our everyday lives. And so, I think it's really difficult sometimes to separate the work that we do from the person we are in the world. And so, if I want to make sure that this is a safe space for you, and also that we are planning in something that you can do to bring yourself joy and a little bit of rest after this presentation or at some point today. And the reason I say that is because for those of us who are coming to this work with our own lived experiences of trauma, it's not always easy to talk about it, right? So I will be the first to come out and say it. I have lived experience of trauma from my childhood. I've lived with a diagnosis of a mental health challenge, depression, for more than half of my life, right? I'm currently still receiving treatment for it. And so it's one of those things where, like, we know the work that we're doing is really important. And sometimes, some days, it just hits different, right? So there are some days when I do this training and I engage in these conversations with folks, and I'm like, yeah, that went great. Like, I feel fine. And there are other days when it brings up all of my stuff, and afterwards I'm thinking about it. So I just want to encourage you after the presentation today to take some space and time for yourself, in a way that is accessible, that doesn't take a ton of your time, that doesn't feel like a burden, but like, what is one thing that you can do today to bring yourself joy or rest after this presentation? And you can pop it in the chat. I'm interested to hear your ideas. I always love to hear from folks about this. So what's one thing, one little thing that you might be able to do today that will bring you some joy? Yeah. Okay, play with the kids, sing in the car, be out in nature. Love that. A face mask. Yes, watch a movie, listen to music. Walks are great. Eat a little bit of chocolate before after the kids go to sleep. Absolutely. You always gotta, like, hide the chocolate stash, right? Walk dogs, spend time with a puppy. Yeah, spending time with pets is so regulating for our nervous systems. Blowing bubbles, absolutely, Christina. Like, yeah, it's a way to regulate your breathing. It brings some joy. It's whimsical. Taking a nap. So rest is super important. Going for a run. Yeah. Lots of people playing with pets, spending time with family. Oh, gossiping with mom. Love that. Yeah. So people are doing physical activities. They are, yeah, working on gratitude lists. I do gratitude practice with my kids every night at dinner. It's just like we go around the table and say one thing that we were thankful for about our day. So it could be like, I'm really enjoying this pasta we're having for dinner, all the way up to, like, I had a really great interaction with a friend today, right? So there's lots of different things. Yeah, I love all of these ideas. Thank you so much, everyone, for sharing them. So, just keep that in mind. I'm holding you to it, making a commitment today to just spend at least a few moments doing something that's going to bring you some joy and some rest. Okay. So let's start out with a definition of trauma. So I want to kind of frame this presentation with thinking about neuroscience, right? And what trauma, like, brings us in this work. So I want to read this definition of trauma out to you, and I want you to pop into the chat if you see anything that stands out or feels particularly impactful about this definition. Individual trauma results from an event, series of events, or set of circumstances that is experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful or threatening and has lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning and physical, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being. It overwhelms an individual or community's resources to cope and frequently produces a sense of fear, vulnerability, and helplessness. So what sticks out to you there? Yes. So lasting adverse effects. I appreciate that. And in all caps, right? So a lot of times we hear folks in our communities saying, like, oh, shouldn't that person be over it by now? Or like, why is this still impacting you so many years after it happened, right? And we know that trauma has a lasting adverse effect, not only on somebody's mental health, but on their holistic well being, right? So trauma is not something that just impacts our mental and emotional health. It impacts our physical health. It can have impact on our spiritual well-being, on the way that we relate to other people in our communities. Absolutely. And then Yvonne and John, you're bringing up the word overwhelms. I think that that is really important too, right? Because this is about that sense of helplessness that ties into the impact of trauma. Has anybody here ever had the experience of being lost or separated from the adult they were supposed to be with as a child? Just out of curiosity. So I want to tell you this story. Yeah. Okay. So people are saying yes. I want to tell you this story. I was maybe 4 or 5 years old, and I was with my dad at a really crowded shopping mall when I was a little kid. And I got separated from him. And even like to this day, as an adult, many, many years later, decades later, right? I can still remember the felt sense of panic that I had in my body when I lost sight of my dad at the mall. Like, I felt like I couldn't breathe. My stomach was in knots. I was like full on panicking, and I can still bring myself back to that moment. It was really, really scary, right? But I have also had the experience of being lost as an adult, right? So maybe like I'm on my way somewhere, I programmed my GPS, but I made a wrong turn. And it wasn't quite as scary because I knew what I was going to do. I was like, okay, well, I just got to pull over and reprogram my phone. Or maybe I'm going to go into this gas station and ask somebody, like, hey, how do you get back to the freeway? I have some autonomy and control of the situation. I have power in the situation. I have tools. I know what to do. And it's a very different experience. And I've been lost plenty of times as an adult, but it hasn't impacted me in quite the same way as that one time I was lost at the mall as a child, right? And so I bring up this example because it's a really simple way to kind of illustrate um, the helplessness that causes the trauma to become more intense. So when an individual or community feels more helpless about the situation that they're in, and this can be a patient navigating a system that doesn't serve them well, or maybe it's that somebody is worried about whether or not they'll even qualify for a resource that they think is available to them. Maybe it's that they have experienced racism or something that is embedded in the system that hasn't served their community. Then they feel like, what am I to do to make a difference in this, right? Like, there is nothing that I can do to change the way the world works. That has a much deeper impact on our brains, a deeper traumatic impact on our brains than an experience does when we feel like we have some autonomy, some control, some choice about how it's going. So that feeling of overwhelm and helplessness that y'all are bringing up in the chat is super, super important, right? Yeah, and so I appreciate all of these things that folks are saying. And Roger, thank you so much for sharing out your personal experience about ACEs. We're going to talk about ACEs in just a second. Yeah, that healing is a journey, not a destination. So all of us have things that we are working on, right? And often it's that feeling of being out of control. It's that feeling of not having the tools. It's that feeling of helplessness that contributes to something becoming traumatic for us. The other thing that I like to highlight about this definition is when it says that trauma isn't just one event, right? I think a lot of times we talk about trauma as if it's one thing that happens to somebody and they can point to it and be like, oh, yeah, that thing happened to me. And that was the trauma that caused all of these other things in my life. Um, but in reality, it says here that it could be a series of events and it could be a set of circumstances, right? So maybe nothing ever physically, like the person was never even physically injured. Maybe they were living in a situation where they just felt unsafe for a long period of time. The threat of that feeling that they were not safe was enough to cause the trauma. Or maybe it's that someone was living without the resources that they needed for a long period of time, like healthcare or food or, any of those essential basic needs. And that could be the trauma as well. So remember that when your patients are coming in to the emergency room, having these lived experiences of trauma, it may not be one thing that they can point to. It could be that they've just been living in a set of circumstances that has contributed to the trauma. Yeah, totally. Ongoing. Uh-huh. Um, okay, so thank you so much for grounding with me in that definition. So just think real quick, and I'm just wondering how we know that. So you're working with folks who are impacted by substance use disorder, substance misuse in your communities. And we know that trauma is a risk factor for mental health and substance use disorders, right? So anytime someone has had lived experience of trauma, they are more likely to develop a substance use disorder. So how might your patients be impacted by trauma? Like what have y'all seen? Yeah, Yvonne, I appreciate that. So you may see that even if you have a brief interaction with somebody already coming into an emergency room, they may have some trauma around that. Right? They may have had some negative experiences with health systems, with healthcare providers in the past. That feeling of anxiety, their trauma being activated by that can contribute to the way that they interact with you, right? So it may appear as if they are being aggressive or argumentative, or they're coming in super agitated. And part of that may be because their brain is in that survival mode. Yeah. And then I see folks saying, Nazareth, you're saying feeling overly cautious. Absolutely. Paranoia. Yeah. We've got people experiencing overdoses, trouble with the law, historical and intergenerational trauma. Absolutely, right? So sometimes it's not just about that individual, it's about how their community has interacted with a system. Um, Absolutely. Having a harder time speaking with staff, feeling mistrustful or distrustful. Yeah. Um, Not being believed about things that have happened to them. Yeah, yeah, Kara, I appreciate that you're bringing up all of these complications that you've seen with your patients around sexual abuse and assault. Absolutely. Feeling like maybe folks won't believe them or that their experiences have not been validated by the people around them in the past. Yep. Loss of family, extreme poverty, incarceration. Yeah. Thank you. So y'all are seeing a lot of really heavy stuff, right? And I want to talk about how that may impact you in just a second, but I want to take a broader look at before we start kind of that discussion about de-escalation on just the prevalence of trauma in general. So the reason I pulled up these stats is because I think a lot of us know this kind of anecdotally already, but among US adults from all 50 states and DC surveyed from the years of 2011 to 2020, two-thirds of them reported at least one ACE, right? So adverse childhood experience. And 1 in 6 people reported 4 or more ACEs. So we had a comment earlier about ACEs. We know that adverse childhood experiences can impact somebody's overall health and holistic well-being, that it can impact their life expectancy. And so we know that that's something to pay attention to, right? And I think that somebody from the CA Bridge team had an additional resource on ACEs that they wanted to share with you. So we'll make sure that you get that as well. Um, So 70% of adults in the US have experienced a traumatic event in their lifetime, according to the National Council for Mental Wellbeing, and 90% of public mental health clients have been exposed to trauma. So I say I'm giving you these statistics to remind us all that when we are working with patients in our community, when we're interacting with other people, clients that you want to support, we want to just assume that they're walking in with lived experience of trauma, right? So we want to treat every individual as if they are already coming with this, regardless of whether or not they disclose it. It's not harmful to take a trauma responsive approach when we get to know them. So, to understand how we heal, we have to understand what's happening in the brain when we experience trauma. Oh, thank you so much, Chaya. So the Chaya just put in a TED talk by Nadine Burke Harris about ACEs, and that is one of my very favorite TED talks. So if you're not familiar with the ACEs, or if you just want to hear somebody talk in a really inspirational and engaging way about what all of this means, please check out that TED talk that Chaya just put in the chat. So let's talk about what happens in the brain. So this is a simple image that I like to share with our brain, right? And our brain, when it is really good, right? Yeah. But our brain, when it's working the way it's supposed to, we are using our prefrontal cortex, our right, that is in charge of like decision making and thinking about the difference between right or wrong, like, should I do this or should I not? Like the part that kind of slows us down and is evaluating our options. It's where our shopping list is. It's where we're thinking through things in a really rational way, right? But it is also working in partnership with another part of our brain. And that's our limbic system, right? So we know that that amygdala, our limbic system is keeping us alive. It's helping us to survive, right? That is the part of our brain that's activated anytime there is something that may be threatening to our safety. And that's the part that kicks in and makes sure that we can survive, right? And when our brain is working well, both of those parts are lit up, both of those parts are activated. And we are just, they're in balance, right? And the way that our ancestors used this was that, let's say, our ancestors were all hunter gatherers, right? So they are out in the world hunting for food, gathering berries, nuts, etc. And if they were out there doing that and a tiger jumped out of the bushes at them, right, that limbic system would be activated. And that's the part that, like Roger is saying in the chat, would cause them to get ready to fight, to run away, to be, to do whatever it took in order to survive. They also needed their prefrontal cortex to make decisions about like, where am I going to go pick berries or all of that, right? So that limbic system's activated when the tiger hops out of the bushes. The thing about the way that we've evolved as humans is that that limbic system, when it activates, floods our body with chemical reactions, right? So it floods our body with all of those stress chemicals like cortisol, adrenaline, and that is actually what helps us to survive. It gets us ready to fight the tiger. So we get that super strength. Y'all have heard those stories about people who are suddenly have this super strength when they're activated. It also helps us to run as fast as we possibly can. So if the choice is that we're going to flee, right, we maybe we're running faster than we've ever run in our entire life because we're trying to get away from that tiger. Maybe it is like what Roger's saying in the chat, we're going to freeze, right? That is, if our brain thinks, oh, we don't have a choice, and this tiger is about to bite us, I'm going to slow my respiration way down. I am going to slow my heart rate way down so that I am not as susceptible to infections, so I'm not going to lose as much blood when that tiger bites me. So maybe we go into that freeze response. There's also appease, right? So maybe it causes us to like throw whatever's in our backpack. Like maybe we have a backpack full of meat from earlier and we're going to throw it at the tiger to appease the tiger so that we can get away. So this is not something that we do a lot of thinking about, right? This is our brain, our limbic system activating, flooding our body with chemicals, and then we just react. And so the image I like to show is when somebody is activated by a stressful situation, by by an interaction that is difficult, by whatever the circumstance is, a tiger jumping out of the bushes, right? That limbic system is activated. And what our brain actually does in service to us is turns off that prefrontal cortex. It's like you don't need to be thinking right now about whether that's a nice tiger or a not nice tiger. Like you're not trying to think about whether or not the tiger has had a meal yet today, right? Where we don't want to have that evaluative part of our brain on. So our brain does us a favor, automatically that part goes dark, and what's in charge is our limbic system and all of those stress chemicals that have flooded our body, right? But the difference is that we now live in a world where it's not like we're encountering tigers jumping out of the bushes at us every single day, right? This is not something that happens regularly. But when someone has prolonged exposure to stress, has had lots of lived experience of trauma, any little threat can be like there's a tiger in that room with them, right? So they may be walking into that emergency room with you, like interacting with you, and their brain is just in this survival mode. So you're trying to talk to them about, like, have a rational conversation with them about something. You're maybe trying to ask them questions about what's going on. And because that prefrontal cortex is dark, they may not be able to even engage in that conversation with you because they are in that flight, fight, freeze, appease mode, right? So what I think that that's a really important thing for all of us to understand because it informs some of the things that y'all were bringing up when I said, what do you see with patients, right? That inability to engage in a conversation with you, that extreme mistrust. If you are the tiger, they're not going to want to come near you, right? So for them, this may feel like an emergency, life or death sort of situation, aside from whatever is physically happening with them at that time. So the analogy that I like to use here is when we are working with somebody who is activated, then it is as if so they're the rider on a horse, right? If we think of the prefrontal cortex as the rider and the horse as sort of that limbic system, if everything is going fine and a person is not activated, this is what it looks like. Horse is riding along, the rider's in control of the horse, telling it where to go, etc. When the person is activated, this is what you get. The rider has fallen off the horse, right? So that prefrontal cortex is no longer in charge or online. We're not having like a rational conversation with that person. They're not thinking about things in the same way. And what we are trying to do is to calm the horse down. Right. What we're dealing with is sort of that animal instinct survival part of the brain, and we're not going to be having those long, complicated conversations with the person about what is going on, how they're feeling, because the horse is what we have in front of us. So it's just kind of a useful image, I think, for y'all to keep in mind when you are with somebody who may be activated, because it's a good reminder to us, like, maybe that's not the question that I want to ask them right now. Or maybe this isn't the way that I want to have this conversation with them, because if it's just the horse in front of you, our priority is safety, right? The priority, as you know, is to keep yourself safe in in this environment, but also to make sure that the patient or the individual you're trying to support feels safe so that they can de-escalate to a point where that prefrontal cortex comes back online, and then you can have the conversation with them. Right? So safety is a really, really important part of all of this. So remember too that the part of our brain that's in charge of survival doesn't care if the threat is real or perceived. So remember when we went through that definition of trauma and we talked about a threat, we were saying, like, it doesn't matter if somebody has never been physically harmed. If they felt that there was a threat of harm, that's enough to produce trauma. So this is true in this case as well, right? It could be that someone, like, nobody at the hospital or in the emergency department has even like touched this person, but they already feel harmed by the environment, right? The threat is what is causing the activation. So just keep that in mind as well. So, what are some of the things that we see when someone has been persistently activated? So, let's think about if someone has had, and this is true, I think, of all of us. So it's not just about the patients that are coming into the hospital, but also those of you who are in this work and have your own lived experience of trauma or your own stressors that come with the job or come with your life outside of work. Um, all of us are under some of this persistent stress, right? And when we are persistently activated, it's kind of like we're in a forest full of tigers, right? Like every single bush, there's a tiger hiding behind it. So we start to experience some of these things. Take a look at this list and tell me what here feels familiar to you. Is there anything here that you're like, "Oh, yeah, I do that when I'm stressed," or I've seen patients who have had that? Yeah. Oh, David, that's a good one. So me too, like right here in your shoulders and your neck. So muscle tension, muscle spasms, muscle pain is really common actually as a response to stress. And do you know why that happens? It's because when our limbic system is persistently activated and your body is always being flooded with those chemicals, those stress chemicals, remember what the purpose of those chemicals is, right? It's to make you ready to fight the tiger or to run as fast as you possibly can. So automatically those chemicals make all of your muscles tense up because it's like, okay, I'm ready. Like I'm going to fight. I'm going to be strong. I'm going to run as quickly as I can. Except the difference is like there's no tiger to fight. So we're not doing the physical activity in that moment to help release that tension. And so we have like tightness in our shoulders. Like I'm sitting at a computer and I'm stressed out. And so I'm like, oh, my shoulders, my neck. Absolutely. Yeah. So I see that other people are saying the same thing. Um, yeah. So I see food cravings coming up with this. Um, Food cravings, I am curious for those of you who put food cravings in the chat, what kinds of foods do you crave or do you see people craving when they're stressed out? Is anybody craving a kale salad? No. She know you're like sugar, yeah. So cookies, sweets, absolutely like all the carbs. Yeah, Rachel, thank you. So all of those things, right? And the reason for that, chocolate, absolutely. The reason for that is because when our limbic system is activated and that part of our brain is like on high alert, our body is flooded with all of those chemicals, then what do we want? Our body is looking for a quick, cheap source of energy because it thinks we're about to fight that tiger, right? So, like, we need all the, like, we need to ramp up and fight the tiger, except when I'm sitting here in my desk chair at my computer and I'm not actually fighting a tiger, except I'm eating all of the chocolate and all the sugar and stuff, then it has a negative impact on my health, right? So thinking about like why that happens can be really helpful to us because it's just a reminder that a lot of this isn't like it's not without explanation, right? Our bodies are doing this for a reason, and it's because of the way our brain is supposed to work, except we're not effectively completing that stress cycle. I saw other people saying, yeah, so issues with memory, concentration, attention, yeah, difficulty focusing. The reason for all of that is because our brain is not prioritizing like all of that stuff, the ability to focus on a task, to remember things, to concentrate is here. Right? It's not in the limbic system because remember, our brain is turning off that prefrontal cortex as a survival mechanism. It doesn't want us sitting there thinking about the tiger and like how many stripes does it have and whether or not what species of what kind of tiger is it, like what does it eat, all of those things. It wants us to just survive. So you'll see a lot of those changes in somebody's ability to focus and someone's ability to make decisions, and then also a lot of times all of these other functions that our body has that are sort of long-term functions, our brain thinks of as a lower priority in this moment, right? And so if our objective right now, we're under such toxic stress that our brain's objective is just to survive, then things like reproductive health, that's on the back burner, right? Like menstruation, back burner. Like we'll deal with that later after we get done fighting the tiger. Gastrointestinal stuff, like if I'm not going to survive in the next 5 minutes, like who cares about how my body's digesting food? So those chemicals are designed to suppress all of those other like tier two priority things in service of survival, right? But again, if there's no tiger and we're not actually dealing with something that is that kind of emergent situation, then it has negative impacts on our overall health. So you may see these signs of persistent activation with your clients, with your patients, but also in yourselves and some of your colleagues, right? And it's just something to remember about and pay attention to. So we know that when somebody is activated, that it can escalate pretty quickly, right? Even in our own lives, in our own relationships. I don't know if y'all have ever had this experience, but like maybe I want to bring a small piece of feedback to a family member in my household, like, hey, could you please put the toilet seat down when you're done with it, or whatever it is. And if that person comes at me with a different energy pretty soon, in like 5 minutes, we may be having a full on argument about a toilet seat. Something inconsequential, right? So we got to know that the way we approach our reactions really, really matter, right? They make a really big difference in that person's brain's ability to either escalate further or de-escalate to a point where that prefrontal cortex comes back online. So what do we do? How can we influence this? Now, the first thing that I want to highlight is the importance of connection. So I know that you don't have a lot of time with your patients. In a professional capacity, you're not going to have time to sit down and have a whole counseling conversation with them, even if you want to, right? I heard that a lot of you come from experiences, professional experiences of being counselors, that you really care about your patients. You want to get to know them. You want to hear their stories, and you may not have the opportunity for that in the emergency room setting, right? So how do we build that connection? The reason that connection is so important is it's because it's part of completing that stress cycle for the brain. So for our ancestors, ideally, the way the stress response would work is the tiger hops out of the bushes, my prefrontal cortex goes dark, my limbic system is activated, I'm flooded with all these chemicals. I either fight, flee, freeze, appease, whatever I need to do. And if I'm lucky enough to survive that tiger attack, then what do I do? So that tiger attack is going to require me to expend a brief burst of really intense physical energy, right? So I'm doing like some kind of physical activity. And then if I'm lucky enough to survive, I return to the campfire. I return to the safety of my community and a space where I feel completely safe, where I feel like I can process the things that have happened through the day. We celebrate the success of the hunt. We celebrate survival. We tell the story of what happened with the tiger. We sing songs about it. We dance about it. We make baskets. We make art. We're together in community. Now, in our modern day world, we don't do that in the same way, right? Many of us go back to situations where we're isolated or we feel like I don't want to bring the stress of work home to this family. So I purposely don't talk about it. I'm not completing the stress cycle in the same way that my brain is intended to. So we need to create holistic safety, not only for our patients, but for ourselves. And remember, it's not just about physical safety. I think that, especially in the health professions, there's a big focus on physical safety of the people around us, and for good reason, right? We have to make sure that everybody is physically safe and well. But what you can create for your patients too is social relational safety, emotional safety, spiritual safety by holding that space for them. Right. So let's talk a little bit about how to engage in some of the de-escalation strategies that might be effective here. So if you are dealing with somebody who's activated, remember, it's the horse, it's not the rider, right? It's the horse. So we're going to use a calm tone of voice. We're going to use fewer words. If we're speaking in like a fast pace with a lot of words, complicated sentences, using clinical jargon, like it's not going to help the person's brain, because remember, we're engaging with their limbic system, not with their prefrontal cortex. So we've got to slow way down. right? It's briefer sentences. We want to be really, really calm. Um, we want to listen attentively and without judgment. So there was a really interesting study that I read that Kaiser did back in 2008 with, I think, 52 uh, physicians and who had they were looking at the relationship between the patient satisfaction ratings and the felt safety of the patients in that environment according to surveys versus like how the encounters went. So they videotaped all of these encounters with the physicians and the patients and recorded the audio, and what they found was that those physicians who gave the patient an opportunity to like just say what they wanted to say, didn't judge and listened attentively were the ones with the highest satisfaction scores. And it totally like makes sense, right? But there's data to prove that. So we want to acknowledge and validate somebody's feelings, right? So if somebody is experiencing even a different reality than you are, like they point over there and they're like, "Oh, that red car," and you look over your shoulder and you see a blue car, we're not going to be like, "No, actually that's a blue car, you're wrong," right? Because it's not going to help de-escalate the situation. So we want to keep the conversation focused on validating their feelings, being like, "Oh, yeah, I get that. Thank you so much for telling me that," right? We're acknowledging them. And then we want to shift into we language. So, making sure that they feel like we're on the same side, right? Like, I'm here to help you and we are on this team together. Here's what we can do. We want to give a little bit of autonomy, right? So remember that when someone is feeling like they are helpless or they don't have any power in a situation, it can cause their trauma to resurface. It can cause them to have that sort of fight or flight survival instinct kick in. So we want to make sure to give choices. Now, there are limits to the choices that we can give, right? So what we like to call this at Cypress is peas and carrots. It comes from like parenting. So it's not that we're not like, yes, we have to eat vegetables at dinner. That's like, sorry, we gotta. Like, that's a rule in this household. But you get a choice. Do you want peas or do you want carrots? Right? So you have a choice within that boundary. So thinking about how to incorporate some choice and voice into that for patients. And then paying attention to physical space and cues, every person's response is going to be different. So a lot of what you're doing is constantly assessing for that person's reaction, right? So like just thinking about like if I take a step closer and I see them take a step back, that's my cue that they need more physical space, right? I'm assessing constantly like if they didn't respond so well to something I said or did, then I want to change my approach. And it can be as simple as maybe even acknowledging that, right? Like if they get really offended by something you say, you can say, "Look, like I just said something that I think didn't land the way I wanted it to. What I really meant to say was," right? So you can ask for a do-over. And sometimes that helps to build credibility as well. And I know that all of you are doing this every single day in your interactions with patients, right? And your interactions with each other and your community members. So I'm sure you have things to add to this list as well. What are some of your ideas? What are some de escalation strategies that work for you? Yeah, absolutely. Yvonne, there's so much to be said for that nonverbal communication that happens, right? So much of our communication of what we do is not even about the words that we're saying, especially if we're dealing with somebody who is activated. So if it's a horse, like the things that I say to a horse aren't going to make as much of a difference as the way I say it, right? So like we're thinking about that energy that we bring into the space. Yeah, so making sure that there's like if you notice that somebody is overstimulated by the environment, you know what it's like. It can be really chaotic, like Sherry was saying at the beginning of this webinar, right? In an emergency room environment. So if there's somewhere quiet that we can take them, if there's a way that we can reassure them, If there's a way to meet basic needs, absolutely, Rachel. So a lot of times we cannot engage with somebody's prefrontal cortex until they feel like their basic needs are being met. So like, would you like a glass of water? Do you need a blanket, right? Like, are there simple things that we can take care of? And in offering those things, you're communicating your care for them. Yeah, and Yvonne, we're gonna get to that, absolutely. So being culturally aware, absolutely. There's a lot of people who use the emergency department as an alternative to primary care because that's what they have access to, right? So maybe it's that somebody is completely out of their element and culturally it feels really, really different and scary. And so, yeah. Um, Yep. So giving again voice and choice, letting them feel like they have some autonomy and power in the situation. Like, do you feel like it's okay to talk right now? Maybe if there's somebody else around them or with them, like you don't know what that relationship might be like. So we're being really careful about that as well. Who's in the room? Who could overhear? What might they be concerned about? Absolutely. So y'all have some like really wonderful skills, I know, and I feel like I'm preaching to the choir a little bit. Like, I don't know how much of this is really useful to y'all because you're experts, right? You live this every day. But what we like to distill it down to at Cypress is what we call the Cypress 3 Cs. There's a lot of other 3 Cs out there, but the Cypress 3 Cs are being caring, consistent, and curious, right? And so being caring, it could be like just not making assumptions, right? Not like, oh my gosh, I know exactly what you're going through, because there's no way I could know exactly what you're going through, right? So maybe it's like, I can't even imagine what that was like. Like I'm really grateful that you're telling me about this, right? Thank you for sharing that with me. I care about what you're telling me. You may not say like I care so much about you because you might reserve that kind of language for a personal, more personal context. But with your patients, you can say like I really care about what you're telling me, right? Come out right out and say it. We can be consistent. So we're going to figure this out together. Remember that switch to the we language can be really powerful. We are on the same team. We're on the same side. Like, let's figure this out together. I am here to help, right? So explicitly saying like, I just want to help. I'm here to help. Here's what I can do, right? So communicating what your commitments and then not making assumptions, right? So um, yeah, I don't want to assume. I'm going to ask some questions. What would you prefer? Right? Giving some voice and choice again. Yeah, Jose, I appreciate that comment. So you walk away if they shut down. So yeah, you can say like, look, you know, it would it I'm going to try to give you a little bit of space, but I will come back. So setting that expectation that like I'm going to be back and I want to figure this out, and so then we come back, right? So we're making a commitment to check in with them again when they're feeling more ready. And every person's going to be a little bit different. Some people are going to want you to sit right there with them. Other people are going to need a little bit of space so that they can regulate, right? Everybody deals with these things in a little bit of a different way. So that constant assessment that you're doing, watching their reactions, body language, etc., is going to be really, really important. And then we get to what has already come up in the chat. So Yvonne brought this up, but thinking about your cultural perspective, right? So thinking about like that our role in this situation is not to impose our cultural beliefs on somebody else. It is to meet them where they are. Listen to what they're telling you about what they are and are not comfortable with, right? Think about the perspective that they might be coming this from if like they're from a completely different place. And remember that culture isn't just about somebody's race or ethnicity or where they grew up. It's not just about that stuff, right? Culture is present in our households that we grew up in. It's present in the hobbies that we do and the sports that we play, in our workplaces, in our schools. And so somebody may look like you and sound like you and come from the same neighborhood as you and be coming with a completely different cultural perspective, right? So just be aware of that as well. And then we talked about this too. So collaboration, empowerment, making sure that we are incorporating peas and carrots. So how do we offer voice and choice to them in our interactions? And then I like to kind of finish off with this really beautiful picture. It's one of my very favorite pictures that I show in my presentations. And it kind of gets back to our conversation that we were just having about um, how so much of what we're doing right now in regulating a person is nonverbal. It's about the presence that we bring into the space, the energy that we have, right? So this picture is of two people, and you'll see that the same parts of their brains are lit up. This is what co-regulation looks like. So take a moment to regulate yourself before stepping into these conversations with somebody who is agitated. And just by that interaction with them, our brains, the mirror neurons in our brains are like communicating, and we can make them feel more at ease because we are at ease. So be thinking about the physiological impact that we can be having on someone just by being present in the space with them. And we have all had this, right? Where like maybe you're having a really terrible day and you encounter somebody whose energy just like lifts you up. That's mirror neurons, right? And the opposite is sometimes true. Like you're having a fine day and then you encounter somebody whose vibe is totally off and low, and you walk away and you're like, dang, what happened to my mood? Right? So we have a lot of influence in just our presence there. Yeah, absolutely, Roger. Just listen. And so the last thing that I'll say is, and we talked about this a little at the beginning, is the work that you're doing is really hard. The interactions, like de-escalating people day in and day out, trying to create safe space for individuals in such an unpredictable setting when they are navigating so many challenges, and you yourself might be bringing in your own lived experience, is hard. So please build in micro routines. I kind of hate the term self-care because I think that it implies that we're supposed to have this like approach of taking care of ourselves and not letting anybody else take care of us. This is about community care, right? So this is about like what is accessible. It's not about like I need to buy a $400 candle and take an aromatherapy bubble bath every single day because ain't nobody got time for that, right? It's about what are the tiny little habits that we can build in on a daily basis, whether it's like reading a letter from your grandma or smelling the smell of your favorite soap, taking a walk. What are the things that help our brains manage this uncertainty and create predictability in our daily lives so that we can be sustained in this work and that you don't burn out because we need you. Um, so thank you so much for listening to my presentation today. I hope that you got something out of it. And I think we have maybe like 2 minutes for some questions.
Oh, Jasmine, you know what? You hit the ball out of the park. It's baseball season, and I just that analogy awesome is what I can say. I mean, it was a lot of information, but I think it was all in a useful way. And you know what? The chat's coming through phenomenal. Great. This is great. So again, we so enjoy you. You have just a calming sense. And I don't know if you guys can feel that this is a virtual, but just hearing her talk and her uplifting tone. Tone has a lot to do with it too when we're talking. So it's just been a wonderful experience. And I love the way you use de-escalation, because I think that's what we need to do as navigators in the emergency room. Where, we might have a counseling background, but it's not the correct time to start that relationship because we're crisis mode. It's that basic instinct, right? That you talked about. I always call it the lizard brain when we're not doing to the prefrontal cortex. That's how I learned it. It's the busy, how does a lizard look? They're on alert, looking left, right. That's it. That's all they're doing. So very good approach. And I hope it really helped our navigators, because this is awesome. There's tons of appreciation for your presentation, Jasmine. So again, you did an awesome job. You will continue to be one of our favorites, and we will be, asking Jasmine. I wish we could do it more, but definitely we'll have her back because you guys are all just really appreciating this. So I really appreciate that. Appreciate you being here. And if you have any questions or anything, even later, type in the chat. We could always get it to Jasmine. So I'm going to share my screen for the last few slides before, I'm sorry, we're going a little bit over, and I really apologize, but, you know, she's got so much to say, you guys. I'm so excited. Um,
Sorry.
that's okay. And then I had personally, I had messed up because basically my okay, here we go. My computer, if you want to know, my internet is going down. So it keeps saying I'm unstable. So I don't know if it's stopping or not. But if it's not, I'm going to share my screen and do the last slides. Thank you so much, Jasmine. I had to quit earlier because of the unstableness of my internet, but we had some objectives and I loved our 3 C's. I wrote that down, you know, very easy to remember. Those are some effective strategies, you know, caring, consistency, and being curious. So definitely we met our objectives. We did the QA. These are some takeaways. Again, establishing trust. Jasmine covered all of these, you guys, and just creating that safe environment. And don't interrogate. Listen, somebody put one of our navigators in the chat. Validating patients' strengths, definitely, and collaborating. And we talked about that. Here's our resources. And I did want to mention, we did talk about trauma-informed care for opioid use disorder. If you have not seen this on our CA Bridge website, Chaya did put this in the chat earlier. It is on our website. Chaya, if you could put that one more time. There's a case study specifically for opioid use disorder. And with that, you can contact us, mentors@cabridge.org. You will receive a post-event email for CEUs and evaluation of our wonderful speaker. So please, if you liked her, you want her back, fill out that evaluations. We do share that with our speakers. So again, thank you, everybody. Sorry for going a minute over. Like I said, we always have so much information. Until next month, you guys.